All right, Megan, we're back from break. All right. I just want to say a little bit on orthopedic nursing, and little bit is a misrepresentation. Or if there was ever any nursing that hasn't expanded and broadened, I think it's. Is that a thing? What did he say?
Come on.
Okay. If you went today to orthopedic nurse, you wouldn't be doing much more than you ever did in school. Or, I mean, it's just the same. And that's, I don't guess, bad. It's just so many ways we can straighten bones and set them. It used to be, I don't know now, I hadn't heard anybody say, it used to be where addiction was the most addicting floor because they gave so many narcotics. And I don't think they do quite that much, but a lot of nurses that I knew, they either find that floor or they become that way on that floor because they give so much narcotics. Bone pain does hurt, but the few little things I want you to know and remember is that there's traction is only two kinds, skin and skeletal. And it's just what it says. Skin, I always used to, when I was young in school, I didn't like orthopedics. They loved to send brand new students to orthopedics. And I never knew whether to take off the traction or not, but it looks so awesome. And if it's skin, meaning ACE bandages is holding the traction, it's wrapped around, say, the leg or the arm, and ACE bandages, it's skin. Yeah, it's skin because, and you can take it off and relieve the traction and bathe them and put lotion on and then put it back. But if it's skeletal, meaning it's in the bone, the pins are in the bone, we don't let the traction up at all. And your big nursing things are to clean those pins around them with peroxide and then put some kind of antibiotic ointment to keep the germs out. The only other thing I need to tell you is we still have just the traction is the Thomas splint, the full leg splint is still around, and the Pearson attachment, it's just the half leg metal traction. We have a lot of wonderful beds now, but used to we remembered Stryker, we remembered circular electric. None of those are anymore because they're such exotic beds. We don't even call them by name. They're just so many of them by companies that make a lot of money. The beds are good. They really are good, but they still need nursing thought in moving the patients. Now, traction's traction, but I'm talking about if they need to be moved. The beds, at the foot of the bed usually has a figure of a person, and you just touch where you want to blow up the air and to tilt them. You want them to tilt to the left or tilt to the right. And all those things about the beds are wonderful, the new beds. But you still got to arrange their extremities or get them comfortable. Those beds, the new beds will help in pressures. Let the pillows out of air under the buttocks, but put it more here. You can 5 minutes on each side. You can do such wonderful things with them, and that's their selling point to nurses. is that you don't have to pull and tug. Well, it's all very attractive, not pulling and tugging, but this patient still needs to be arranged every 2 hours or so. That's pretty much it for orthopedic nursing. We hadn't changed a lot. Now, oh, one more thing. Back to diabetes. We'll get through it. We'll get through it yet. Who, not you, Mandy, somebody else came up here and said something to me about diabetes. Who was it? And I thought, just a minute. Incidentally, nuts, our best snack. Well, like we said, berries, but they're the perfect snack. About a small handful every day is enough because they reduce abrupt increases in glucose and insulin. Now wait a minute. Did anybody else talk to me about, what else did we talk about, Mandy, for a minute? Oh yeah, that's what I wanted. Yes, that's it. She was talking about, she'd never really heard it as dramatically stated as I did on brain cells. Huh?
Aaron and my daughter had it sometimes. I'm like, oh no, brain cells.
But they say every place in the body does fine with breakdown of carbs for sugar, except the brain. The brain loves sugar, and it wants sugar, and the neurons have to have sugar. They can get by with carbs, but they love real sugar. Now, if we keep the brain cells from getting that sugar, then they do die. And I just don't think nurses, they just, draw up insulin and give it and not think, is the breakfast going to be here? Because if I give insulin that is going to start in 5 minutes cutting my sugar in the veins, then the sugar to my brain won't be there. If it's going to be a wham and I don't have sugar in my head. I know it was pushed with me in nursing school. I was working, John Gaston Hospital had wards in Memphis, and I was in nursing school, and of course we didn't do finger pricks. We just, at supper time, just put the bottle by the bed, and they were to get urine. And just so casual. And I never will forget his name, Mr. Booker. So it was I didn't do it. The tech put out the bottles to get urine in the ward and went to supper. And so in a little while, when everybody was saying, well, we need all the urine in. Well, Mr. Booker hadn't even stirred. And we went over and his blood sugar was like 10. And he never came back with us because his brain was just gone. And that's what it was. She left it to take his urine, but he wasn't even with us to take it. He had already gone into his coma. And as I was telling Mandy, as you know, the worst coma is the hypoglycemia, that it isn't getting sugar. Hyper, it's just amazing. They can be 600, 800. They may get goofy, but it doesn't do any brain damage, which is very good. So just keeping that in mind. It seemed like there was something else on that. Maybe that was just it. Okay, now cancer. I'm not going to spend but a few minutes on that either. What is cancer? Nobody quite knows. We do know, this much we know, that a cell has a code, and for what it's supposed to do in life. As one place I read, it said that because of our codes, we don't have a hair growing out of our eyeball, because those cells have a code, and that's a beautiful thing. They're so in sync. So cancer is when the code gets messed up. And why does it get messed up? Well, we don't know completely. We do know irritation, constant irritation. Its cells finally throws the code. I tell the story. I don't even think he knows I tell the story. My husband told me one time he had a little girlfriend in grammar school. Her name was Toogie, he said. And Toogie always had a jawbreaker. And I think he envied her of a jawbreaker. But Toogie always had a jawbreaker. Toogie dies years later of cancer of the jaw, of the gum. And it's that constant, it wasn't tobacco, but it was constant irritation. And that's what they say on, and you know, a lot of the lung cancer, yes, tars are not good. They're constant irritants, tars. And anything that is a constant irritation. And then they say, of course, stress is a constant irritation to our whole body, is stress. They did research in England for about 30 years on women that are stressors, nervous ninnies, and there was more cancer with them than non-stressed women. So it's kind of been verified. And the whole thing is, as we've talked in here, estrogen does not start cancer, but if you have the cells that are gone atypical, then they just slurp up estrogen and get the growth just quadruples. And doesn't fat secrete estrogen? And so there's nothing wrong with estrogen. It's just if you've got cancer, it feeds it. Estrogen feeds it. Now, and I think I told you all, I think I did, on the lungs, when we talked about the lungs, if they're constantly irritated by asbestos or nicotine or whatever, paint, fumes, they'll fight, and maybe they're injured. They keep replenishing and keep on. The compensatory aspect of our body is just unbelievable. So our lung cells just toughen it out until they decide to toughen up. And that's when they change their DNA and become squamous so that they can handle our abuse. And in that change might be cancer, squamous cell carcinoma, or whatever. So, and then I think I mentioned the same thing with the columnar cells of the cervix. The cervix in adolescence, they are columnar. I think I'm saying this right. They're columnar in pre-adolescence, our cells of our cervix, but in adolescence they become squamous, so more squamous, so that they can handle intercourse or whatever. So, and that's a natural my GYN, I know I told you she was kind of low one day and said, I just see so many young girls with atypical cells in the cervix. Well, they're changing anyway in pubescence. That cervix cells are changing their code. I mean, they're a different code. So if they have a lot of introduction to something that throws them, then it could be atypical, and then I told y'all that's not so uncommon, but we don't want it to go crazy and the code gets changed and it's cervical cancer. She said with multiple partners, the different semens, the tobacco use early, all that while that change is happening. And that's a natural change, but it can have some interference, where the lung change is not natural. Well, the body's trying to save you. And we've already talked, I think, on blood markers, that they are different ones pinpoint the different types of cancer. And I think we mentioned CA-125 for ovarian cancer, but they're not, some of them aren't reliable. There are a lot of markers. CA-57, 55. You can always know if it starts CA and a number, it's a blood marker for cancer. Some people think it is still, not some. There is the thought it is a virus. And you know, we have such a hard time doing anything with viruses. Trying to think. They do, you know, when we're stressed, our body is not at its optimum. And so often that's when cancer sets in, is when we are down. And that's when germs and viruses love to slip in on us, when we're not physiologically so good. Okay, so that's that. Now, the rest of the time, I hope we can do hematology, burns, and shock. Now, some of you've watched, so I want you to chime in if I overlook something. But the hematology movie, YouTube, it's kind of, it's not too long, is it, Jennifer? I can't remember. It's not too long. Okay. It's shock that's about 30 and short. Well, so I'll just go and, you know, repetition is the mother of learning, and I think it's all right for you to, if you've seen that, maybe digest a little more, process. And we've already said, in hematology, the study of blood, the blood is made up of cells and then plasma. 55% is cells and 45% plasma. And we've talked about platelets we need for clotting, white for fighting, and then red for our nutrients and oxygen carrying, just to get our cells nourished and with oxygen. I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. You already know red lasts 120 days, we said, 4 months. White, I don't know what I said in the video, but it'll last from 1 day to weeks to months to years. If you have an entry of virus or a bacteria, they start making fast, and so their life is very varied, a white blood cell's life. Platelets last about 10 days in our bodies. They're all made in the bone marrow. Now, plasma is made up of water. 98% of the plasma of blood is 98% water. And then you have albumin. Now, albumin, remember, albumin's that part of our blood that has osmotic characteristic. it's what down here at the very tip end of your skin that it allows the nutrients to go through the membrane, osmotic exchange. And it's the quality of your blood with albumin that allows that exchange. And you know, when your blood is sick, you look awful. And it's because of that exchange. Albumin is just not getting that red cell where it needs to be. I think the body, well, it's just so amazing. But your blood gets down to single file cells. Single file. And and then they swap and pick up trash, let off oxygen and nutrients. And I just imagine at the very tip end, it's just like a railroad tunnel. It twirls back and comes on back, bringing that load of waste back to the heart to be relieved, well, back to the kidneys or the lungs or wherever, to be relieved. Goodbye. You know, when blood enters the right atrium and then goes into, this is venous, so it enters the right atrium, goes to the right ventricle, and then it goes to the lungs. And that's where the CO2 goes off. And we pick up more oxygen, can get it in there, left atrium, left ventricle, and now out arterial blood out into the heart, full and rich with oxygen. Now, the plasma, so we got albumin to do that osmotic necessity. And you know, we don't put enough praise into that part of our blood that allows that exchange to happen. Because if you don't have that, it's not going to do that permeable membrane activity. So we got water, we got albumin, we got gamma globulin in there. And gamma globulin is antibody. Anytime you see the word gamma globulin, you know it's already an antibody. It's going to fight something. And so we got some that we made ourselves, some that inoculations made for us, some our mother gave us. Actually, those don't last for about 4 months, I think, our mothers. But so we've got gamma globulin, then fibrinogen, and fibrinogen is going to help us clot. Are there any more I've forgotten? Is that it? Sometimes I've asked a question on a test. Why would a patient be given plasma? Because we'll give it, and I'll show you in a couple of weeks when we do blood demonstration. Why does a patient get plasma? It's not for nutrients, or I'd just give you blood, red cells. And the answer is, I don't need it for the water. Thank you. 98%, I don't need water. If I needed albumin, we have that in a little bottle that we give IV albumin. So it isn't for that. And gamma globulin, I can give a shot of that gamma globulin. You know, if you come into contact with the hepatitis or anything, they send you to the ER to have a gamma globulin. Fight it right now. Go after it right now, and we'll get to that. Our last week together, we're going to talk immunology. The reason is fibrinogen. Usually, if you're getting plasma, it's that you need the fibrinogen to help in your making cells to clot. Now, if we're, for whatever reason, the red cells are less than they should be. You can see on your card, we want about 4,000 red cells. But I used to never learn that because I just learned hematocrit hemoglobin, and that's in essence the same thing. Now, I don't want y'all to ever tell a physiologist I said this, but it's the best way to imagine hematocrit hemoglobin. I may have already talked to you. I think of hematocrit because it's the red cells. Hematocrit is kind of the sediment, and hemoglobin, well, the definition for hemoglobin is oxygen carrying capacity. Okay, then I say it carries it. So don't say I said it, but imagine that hematocrit is kind of the sediment, and hemoglobin is the mobility aspect. And I think I did bring this up already. If you bled out from a wreck and went straight to the emergency room, they take some of your blood and the proportion is still the same. You've lost whole blood, but your hematocrit hemoglobin, in other words, the comparison of the good to the oxygen carrying capacity, is the same. It'll take it a little while for it when it registers your blood loss and so forth. But now it's different, and I think I mentioned this in burns. You evaporate fluid so that it makes that skewed, and a burn patient may have a high hematocrit and not a comparable hemoglobin. And I think I told you to remember, my students, they want to argue with me. I tell them, remember, hematocrit is, hemoglobin is a third of hematocrit. To me, that's easy to remember. If you have a 36 hematocrit, you have, oh my goodness, look who's coming in. If you, oh, if you, hi Denise, we're proud to see you. So if you have a 7 hemoglobin, you have a 21, is that right? A 21 hematocrit. They're a third. My students say they didn't learn it that way. I said, I know, but it's a good, easy, no, we've learned the numbers. Well, that's fine, but I think those are hard to remember. But you want about a 40 hematocrit, so I want about a 13 or a 14 hemoglobin. If I have problems with my red blood cells, I've got an anemia. Just a blood problem doesn't mean you're anemic. It has to be involving the red cells for anemia. If you have a white blood problem, then it's like leukemia. We've got a problem with white cells. Leuka, meaning white, emia, blood. If you have a clotting problem, if it's low, it's thrombocytopenia, the cells that are low. Penia meaning low. And so leukopenia, white cells are low. You and I want 5,000 to 10,000 white cells. If it's below that, someone's leukopenic. If their hemoglobin is, if their hematocrit is low 30s, well, they won't, I think we've already said they don't let you give blood at under 38. They'll let you give it at 38. You and I want 40. They'll let you give blood at 38. At 37, they won't let you give blood. Do you need blood? No. You can go on down to, they really rather it be 23 before they give blood. And I went to a seminar about 2 years ago. They are really, now we're going to always be giving blood, but they are really trying to keep from giving as much blood in hospitals. because they think the bone marrow does better working itself than being given a gift. It's kind of like the little engine that could. It works so hard and works so hard and works so hard. But if all of a sudden, and our bone marrow is working so hard to make red cells, and you give it in a transfusion of these fabulous red cells, the bone marrow stops and rests. And it takes more to boot it up to start working as hard as it was. So they're liking to send people home anemic and rest and try to build it up through diet. Maybe the shots of Proeton or Procreate. Uh-huh.
You know, just a fabulous nursing intervention for sending someone home with anemia is to have them use a cast iron skillet to cook with on a regular basis. It is one of the best ways to get iron into your diet.
Great.
And not only that, but the body easily absorbs it. It just absorbs the iron so much easier than if you use a tablet.
Great.
So,
Great.
I've dealt with iron deficiency anemia for the longest time, and that has been the thing. I had to get iron infusions. I had to get
Oh
the
no.
worst thing are the iron injections that you taught us about, the track method, the iron injections last time, and I just really so well.
And you're saying the iron skillet and what else? Did you add something else to the iron skillet, Krista?
No,
Uh-huh.
just cook everything in it. I just use it on a regular
Using the
basis.
iron skillet for
Yeah,
anemia.
and I don't need to take iron salts or any supplements.
That is so
Whereas
good.
before I used to, I had to take all the time.
Isn't
So
it?
it just, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Plus I had hysterectomy too, so that
Yeah.
that helped with the bleeding.
That did,
That
and the
helped
loss
with
of
bleeding.
blood. Yeah.
But it's you know, I had to catch up, and so yeah.
That's
but
good.
It's really good work. It's a great nursing intervention.
Yes,
to-
and something to teach. Yeah. Thank you. Now, and so we platelets, 100,000 on your card, 100,000 to 450,000, and we transfuse for platelets always if they're 10,000. And I think your notes in your brief say at 50,000 you're at a high risk to bleed. At 20,000 you're a high risk for spontaneous bleeding, just sitting here talking. The 50,000, if I hit you, you might bleed and bruise. But 20,000, you may just pop a vessel spontaneously and bleed, called a CVA, or whatever. Now, the anemias, iron deficiency is the most common, and that one, we'd like to think diet would it's the one diet might help. It might not always, but it might help. A diet with vitamin C and iron, or the iron skillet. But there are all kinds of others. There's some that just doesn't have an enzyme that they need, your red blood cells, or they're defective. And it's a familiar thing. The whole family have red cells that don't live 4 months. So there are several kinds of anemias. The easiest and to cure is an iron deficiency one. Now, I do have to mention the pernicious anemia, because it's not diet. Well, it is B12. You're not absorbing B12. But taking in B12, you're going to get it because of the intrinsic factor. You and I, if we don't have pernicious anemia, our GI tract has that intrinsic factor in our GI tract that absorbs B12. But if we don't have it, B12 leaves us and we are anemic, because our red cells need B12. So if B12 doesn't get absorbed, our red cells aren't healthy and don't live long enough. So and I just think it's a fascinating happening that somebody came up, Dr. Schillings, I guess, that the Schillings test. If you're anemic and they're pretty sure it isn't iron deficiency, then they need to do a Schillings test. And what it is they need to see if your intrinsic factor is working. So they give you, and I'm going to help y'all may need to correct me because I hadn't even thought about it that long ago. They will give you a shot of B12. Well, that's going to be absorbed immediately in your bloodstream. That's great. So you've got a big shot of that, and then they give you in capsules radiopaque or B12, and you swallow them in your GI tract. If you have the intrinsic factor, you're loaded with B12 to the point you discard it in your urine. And so you immediately get a 24-hour urine started. Emptying the first specimen here at 3:30 and putting 3:30 today and start it then. It goes 24 hours, and if that 24 shows you are so high in B12, then you've still got your intrinsic factor. There's something else going on because you're absorbing in the GI tract B12, and you got the massive here. If that specimen is just okay, then you probably did not absorb the B12 in the GI system and only absorbed what was given in a shot. And I was going to say something else about B12. It just goes out in your feces, any of the B12, because it didn't get absorbed to go into urine. So that's pernicious anemia in the Schillings test. I just think that's so great somebody came up with that. And as I said, there are other anemias, but realize they're just a red blood cell problem. Now, on leukemia, it's interesting because you produce too many. And you say, well, that'd be wonderful to have a lot of white cells to fight. Well, they're no good. I always say it. I think of if you had dough in a pan, cake dough, with a mixer, and brought that mixer up and it's just all over the ceiling. Well, you've got a lot of cake dough, but it's worthless. And that's kind of what the cells, the white cells, you've got so many. How many? Well, 5 to 10,000 you and I want. At 30,000, everybody gets a lump in their throat. Over 30,000, it's real worry. You may have a bad infection and it run to 30,000. But when it gets much over 30, and don't hold me to it, somebody might have 40,000, it'd be just a raging infection. But the point is now they're just pouring out, their Vera is pouring out ineffective white cells. And that's, so leukemia is white in the blood, but so often, and so when bone marrow is just gone crazy making white cells, they're crowding out red and platelets. And so the leukemic first diagnosis, I heard a seminar and they said back pain is one of the first of leukemics, but also bruising. So if somebody had bruising that they didn't used to have, and back pain, it's not a good sign. And so what do? They try to kill those white cells off by chemo or something to just, your spleen, our beautiful, wonderful spleen, all our blood goes through the spleen, and the spleen's job, if you remember, is to get rid of any of the blood cells that look funny. And so if it's any peculiar cells, the spleen pulls them out of our bloodstream. Well, you can imagine that's another thing. If somebody went to the doctor because of their bruising or their back pain. Now, back pain's so vague that bruising is more a diagnostic tool. And you lay down on the examining table, and they feel your spleen. You and I shouldn't be able to feel a spleen, but if it's big, then it's so full of bad white cells is what it amounts to. And there's so much I want to say. Turn in your briefs to the steroid. Was it 22? No, 21. And you see that's under steroids. The second property, steroids do the following. No, they do the following. Coat platelets so the spleen won't kill them. And with that, I'll ease into problems with platelets. I told you they live 10 days. If you get a transfusion of platelets, they last a day in a leukemic. And then why even bother? Because you've got to have some clotting. And if your platelets are down to 6,000, you can just bleed to death at a moment's notice. So at least let's get some platelets in to shoot you up a little bit. There is a platelet problem. I mean, high or low aren't real good. You have high platelets, you're going to clot too quick, and now we've got clots. If you're too low, you're going to bleed. And now the tissue isn't getting fed oxygen and nutrients or anything because you're bleeding everything out because of the platelets won't let you clot. There is another illness with platelets, idiopathic thrombo. So idiopathic means crazy as it may seem. Idiopathic thrombo, all right, we know right now clot, cytocellopenia, down. And that's just what it is. It's an illness of platelets being down that nobody knows why it happens. I've seen children, there's been a child or two at camp that has idiothrombocytopenia, but mostly the research says they're mostly college students around 19s and 20, and it comes on kind of like flu, and then they bruise it. And that's scary. So they go to it's happened so much. I've talked to people on college campuses, and I don't know why it happens a lot on college campuses, but there they come in, and they see the bruising, and so they know the platelets are going to be down, and it's kind of a scary, tense time because the platelets are going to be down. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. But what gets you a good breath of air is that the red and the white are not down, and they're not crazy. So then they're diagnosed as thrombocytopenic idiopathic. And here's the craziest part of it all. These platelets, you wake up one morning in idiopathic thrombocytopenia. The person wakes up and notices they've got some bruises. What has happened is one day the body said, they don't call it an autoimmune, but that's kind of what it is. The body says, my goodness, platelets, you don't belong to me, and I need to get rid of you. And so it produces an antibody to try to kill your own platelets. And I always graphically picture it. The platelet is fine, but the body doesn't think it's fine. So the antibody gets on top of it to kill it. And it doesn't kill it. It does fine till it hits the spleen. And that big old hunking thing does not pass the requirements of the spleen. So the spleen kills it. And so that's why your thrombocytopenic is the spleen has killed the platelet, because it looked peculiar. It's a very odd illness. Now, that, what I had you look up, coats the platelets so the spleen won't kill them. So steroids are usually the first thing used when someone's diagnosed with idiopathic thrombocytopenia. They give them steroids, and in essence, that's what it does. It kind of fools the platelets to go through. Then, that didn't work. And you don't want to give steroids to people for too long. They get the buffalo neck, the chipmunk face, and they don't heal good. The fat distributes. So you don't want steroids a long time, and they're still suffering with thrombocytopenia. So then the physicians, actually they're doing it fairly quickly now, using an antibody solution, which anytime you see an I, capital I, and then the next two are lowercase, IgE, IgS. You don't have to know what they are, but they're antibodies. Anytime anybody gets an antibody, it's called IgG, IgS, and it's given to try to counter the antibody that's sitting on being a parasite on the platelets. That antibody that's on top of the platelets isn't hurting the platelet. The platelet is still functioning until it enters the spleen. And the spleen just says it looks too peculiar and gets rid of it, unless you can fool it with steroids. Or, let's say the antibody that they're getting IV now isn't working either. And so then the next and final is the splenectomy. Take the spleen out, so it will quit. And ITP, which is called ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura, goes away just about as crazy as it comes. Isn't that just ridiculous? It just, one morning then you wake up and you're not bruising, you notice. If you can wait that long, that's the problem. TTP. There is another one called TTP. What's the T? The two T's. Huh? Yeah, but there's T. Did I put it in the lecture? TTP. Say it again. No. Thrombocyte. Yeah, there's another one very similar, and it's TTP.
I just looked it up.
Yeah.
Thrombotic.
Thrombotic. Oh. Yeah. That's kind of what you said, wasn't it, Kathy? It's clotting that is thrombo. The clots, again, it's treated with an antibody, and it's not as prevalent, but it's diagnosed. We had a patient from Memphis here, And I kept thinking, this patient's got ITP. Then I talked to the patient, and they said, oh, we were in Memphis, and they sent us up here because they thought it was ITP, but it wasn't getting anywhere. And then they decided it was TTP, which is similar, but not, I mean, it's not exactly. It's more clots. The platelets are letting you down, not just the spleen letting you down. Do what? May have been. Now, let's see, wait just a minute. Now, let me go back to white cells just a minute. And, well, no, all three. Because we've got so, if your blood doesn't have an illness, we're so fortunate to not be anemic and to not have white difficulties or clotting difficulties. Now, and I've told you the age of them, but I want to talk, red, they just are born from the bone marrow as adults. Platelets the same way. White, different. And I don't know why the Creator did it, but I had a whole nother plan with white cells, because all the others come out of the bone marrow straight as adults, but the white grow up. They're born little and they grow up. Now, it's a little bit to our advantage to know that. And here's the deal. I was wondering if y'all had it. I don't think it's in this data, in your handouts. So white cells are 5 to 10,000. That's what we want. And so, well, I'll give you an example. I was with a physician once in the ER or something, and the woman coughed, and so he listened. Just seconds, he said, she's got pneumonia, but I don't know if it's bacterial or viral. And so we drew blood, and he ordered a CBC, which white, hematocrit, hemoglobin white, and if they need to add platelets, they will. And so, but he did CBC and differential. And the differential is going to break down the white, because he knows she's got pneumonia, she's got an infection. He needs to know which white cells are high to indicate is it bacterial or viral. So we've got 5 different kinds of white cells. And it's easy. Eosinophils are high if we've got an allergy. So the patient feels bad, and their WBCs are high. If a differential is done, and eosinophils, they know it's an allergy. If it's viral, lymphocytes are high. Lymphocytes, white cells that increase for a virus. And see, that's what the physician needed to know when he sent the CBC and differential, if the viral part's high. I'll get to bacterial. We're going to get to bacterial in a minute. Basophils show a blood dyscrasia, like leukemia. It's real tiny, it's like 0.5 to 0.7, but if it's elevated, we've got something wrong, real wrong, with our blood. So, and then monocytes. And the literature will tell you, we don't really know what they do. They're white cells. And I feel comfortable just saying that they help clean up. They clean up, and I've made this up because of the bits and pieces I read about monocytes, and nobody knows really. And they'll say they clean up for lymphocytes and some others are white cells. So it's vague what monocytes do, but they're good and they're helpful. But it's not definitive of what's wrong with you with monocytes. And then the last are the neutrophils, which indicate bacterial infection. And neutrophils have other names. It's according to your hospital. And they are, listen to me, they are the adult fighting white blood cells for bacteria. So they can be neutrophils. In another hospital, they call them segmented neutrophils, segs. Another hospital may call them what? Polysegmented neutrophils. Polysegs, segs, neutrophils. There's one more. Polysegs. Polymorphs. Polymorpha neutrophils. Polymorphs, segs, polysegs, neutrophils. They're all ready-made, or not ready-made, grown-up, adult fighting bacterial cells. They're going to find the bacteria and fight. Now, so when a differential comes back, if the lymphocytes are high, I know it's a viral infection. If the neutrophils are high, I know it's bacterial. Now, the neutrophils are the one white cell that, and I think it's a great idea the Creator had to see how far along we are with this raging infection. So I told you the adult, but mixed in that differential might be some teenagers and some babies. Neutrophils, they're bacterial fighting. It's the only one of the white cells that show growth and aging. They're born juveniles. I call them babies. And then they grow up to be teenagers, they grow, and they're called bands. Another hospital may call them stabs. Stabs or bands are the teenagers. And then you know what they are, adult. So the great aspect of it is that, and the reason it's so wonderful to see a differential that shows, a hospital won't show all three. Usually a hospital looks at bands or stabs and neutrophils or juves, because all we need is to look at the adults versus the younger ones to know where we are in this in the time frame of the infection, i.e. this infection. So how long have you been coughing and bringing up phlegm? 2 weeks. Okay, been doing it 2 weeks. So the differential comes back and the polymorphs are high and the juves are high. Then we know this person's right in the middle of a raging infection, because the body is saying, you got to keep pouring them out. You've got to keep on higher and higher. So if they're both high, a young one's high and the adults are high, we're right in the middle of a raging infection, albeit bacterial. If the neutrophils are normal and the stabs are high, then it's just starting. They don't instantly make a lot. They have to tell the bone marrow to start making a multitude. And so this normal adults were what it was when I was well. But I've sent word to the mirror, you put out 5 armies for me. So the stabs are high, the neutrophils are normal. I know this infection's real early. If the segs are real high, but the bands are normal, then it's resolving. It resolved itself. It was able to kill and get word, you can go back to normal. I think what you made for me is going to work. So it's a great way to see where we are in the time frame of the infection. Pretty wonderful. When we get back results of differential, if they haven't put a younger one, usually means they're normal. And of course, if the adults are normal, that's a beautiful thing. So, any questions? Jennifer, do you see anything I hadn't covered in hematology? I'm trying to think. Of the, yeah, and that's not, yeah, a few more of those. I'll go on, I may think of other things. Let's go on to shock. Well, before I do, we give whole blood, the platelets, the cells and the plasma for blood loss. Oh yeah, there's something else I want to say. So if a motor vehicle, a gunshot wound and blood is lost, they get hold. And that, there's no going home and doing an iron skillet on that one. We've got to replenish. But as I said, they really have cut back, except for trauma. Now, and I'll forget it if I don't stop right now and tell you, there was a refresher in this class that told me several classes ago, her husband, I do think sometimes the doctors send them home if the wife's a nurse. She thinks that's right. She said her husband had an 18 hematocrit, which meant he had a 6 hemoglobin, and they went home from the hospital. She said it was a good 3 months, feeding him right, resting, and he got it back, but it's a slow process. Should have cooked with the skillet, and that's what they're after. I wanted to add that. It's a slow process. Well, red cells, 4 months. It's a slow process. Now, wait a minute. I veered off. Now, where was I, y'all? Wait a minute. Do what? Trauma. And there. Thank you. So that's whole blood. My floor, we never give whole blood. It's oncology, and we never give whole blood. They don't need the fluid. They need the red cells, or they need the red cells because the chemo has knocked out everything. Because chemo tries to kill bone marrow to try to, or the tumor to try to. So it just kills good healthy cells too. So on my floor, we give red blood cells, not the plasma, and not the platelets, and not the white. Platelets are given. We do give platelets by cell. Always, if it goes below 10,000, and they try to let the body do best, and work real hard. If they've wiped them out so bad, they need to help get things started. And the shots we've talked about, Neupogen, Procreate, all kind of stimulate the bone marrow. white is an interesting one because you don't ever walk down the hall of a hospital and see a bag of white. It might be lipids, but it's not white blood cells. So we don't give them like that. The way that we get white blood cells back up with the colony stimulating, the Neupogen sub-Q, trying to make that make white cells. I've never done it. I even checked a few years ago to see if anybody was done it or was old-timey. They say you can get white blood transfusions. Never have seen it, never heard anybody had it. We don't do them in this Middle Tennessee, I'll tell you. If they do it, they can go to Rochester, Minnesota or someplace. But they say that if the place does infusions of white cells, they have chase lounges, you lay down, they take the donor, bring the donor, inject the needle, the catheter, bring their blood out, centrifuge the white out, and the white goes into the person next to you on the chase lounge, and they can either give you back, they can give the blood back to you without the white cells. And the interesting thing is, you've given white cells, but they said at the end of the transfusion, your white cells are higher than they were when you started because of the trauma. If trauma happens to your body starts right immediately. I just think that's fascinating. Like I said, probably need to look it up and see if anybody's doing that. I checked not long, I'd say a couple of 3 years ago. I said, does anybody really do that? Yeah, they said they do. We just don't. And really, if a shot can do it, a $600 shot, that's pretty wonderful if it can get those white cells going. So as far as hanging up bags of white cells, we don't. We hang the platelets, we hang the plasma, and we hang the red, and we hang the whole. And I'll go over it next, it's next week, isn't it? The 3rd. We have the IV day. Now, shock, the most common shock is hypovolemic volume, car wrecks, gunshot wounds, when you're losing your volume. But we've got a couple of more, some of them change their name off and on, but hypovolemic, the most important. Cardiogenic, the heart pump is just not pumping that blood everywhere it needs to go. So that's the second kind of shock. And then the third changes its name every so often, but it's an umbrella shock. They call it distributive. It can be called circulatory shock, distributive shock. I think that's the only shocks I said, wasn't it, Jennifer? And it's an umbrella. That whole thing was an umbrella, that distributive, vasogenic, distributive, circulatory, all those are vasogenic. That's a good one to remember with it. And under it are some more shocks. And under that, you've got anaphylaxis, septic, and neurogenic. And so we've got hypovolemic, cardiac, and vasogenic, distributive, circulatory, which under it, you know what septic is. You've got more bacteria or virus cells than you do red. I mean, you've got a raging infection. Neurogenic is, I always just picture Christopher Reeve, Superman, his injured spinal cord. Your spinal cord is injured, or your neurological aspect from anesthesia, it's on the blink. You're neurologically not fitting, and so you go into shock. So it might be drugs, it might be anesthesia, it might be an accident that injured your spinal cord. The third is anaphylaxis, which is so odd because you just wake up one morning and all of a sudden the body thinks that something about you is going to kill you, i.e. An antigen. And we'll get to that some in immunology, the immune system. When antibiotic is a good example, or anything that you might be allergic to, the body starts reacting. And it's reacting by pouring histamines. And it keeps by pouring the histamines, that can kill us if our histamines aren't balanced. And so we go into anaphylaxis. The vasogenic shocks have to just be treated palliatively. Neurogenic, I've got to keep you breathing. If it's out of sync, your anesthesia or your injury or your drugs have thrown your breathing, I just got to keep you alive. That's the medical nursing care of neurogenic shock. Anaphylaxis, of course, epinephrine. And then septic antibiotics. Now that's easy. It's really just, those shocks that's the best we can do in the medical nursing community. We can do better with hypovolemia and cardiac. Let's take hypovolemia. And I think the best way for me to think about hypovolemia is that you've lost your volume. You can have it with loss of volume, but you also have it when your body is full of gram-negative rods. Well, why isn't that septic? Well, it's probably pretty close, but you just call it shock. But hypovolemic is your blood volume is so crowded with gram-negative bacteria, it's like you're low volume. You're really not. So it is a lot like septic, but don't split hairs. It's not called septic. It's called hypovolemic. The whole point is that blood with all that wonderful nourishment isn't getting to our tissue. And as I said, it's usually from an accident that blood's getting out of the body, or bacteria is crowding it, so it's still not getting to the tissue. And so the symptoms of it, of hypovolemic shock, I think it's good to think of a tire, a wheel tire, inner tube. And if you puncture that inner tube, the pressure goes down. But I don't want it to go down. So I've got to pump harder to keep it up. It's got a puncture, but I've got to, so that's what the heart does. The heart starts beating faster to try to keep that pump up, the pressure up in us. Of course, the blood pressure is going down. I punctured something into the tire. So the blood pressure with hypovolemic is going down, the heart rate's going up, and with pressure going down and rate going up, the blood pressure, they say everybody thinks oxygen and all that guides our physiological processes, but that blood pressure does a big job, because when the blood pressure drops, the baroreceptors in our brain feel that drop. They're just so sensitive to the blood, and that's when it alerts the respiratory system to get busy and breathe and take in more oxygen, because this person doesn't have enough blood capacity to work the tissue. So breathe faster. So your tachypnic breathing's increased. And then, I think this is one of the most fascinating. Of course, the sympathetic minute that blood pressure and heart rate, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in with that change in our blood pressure and heart rate. So flight and fight has started, and I think vasoconstriction is the most fascinating thing, because with the sympathetic nervous system, everything clamped down, and it's trying to push all that blood and nutrients to the vital organs. Our skin doesn't need it. So it clamps down, and we're paler because it's shooting everything to the center to try to keep the heart going. So we're paler, we're pale, and then what's so interesting, the clamping down made moisture on the skin come up, and we're clammy. So you're cold, you're clammy, you're pallid, and then, and you're tachypnic, the liver gets the message. You don't need me digesting food and breaking down food. So the activity in the liver is down. Your GI tract is down. That's why a lot of people, if they stay that in too long shock state, they start getting an ulcer, because those acids are just sitting. Urine output's down. And of course, because our whole volume is down, so the urine is down. And here's the craziest thing of all. When the clamp happened with vasoconstriction, the sympathetic nervous system made vasoconstriction happen, red cells got caught and busted. And some didn't, but some did with the clamp down. And so, yeah, we lost some red cells, but it's trying to keep our heart going by giving it more blood, and our kidneys. And so, with the clamp down, blood goes, it's still going to go to the kidney, but now it's our urine is hematuric, it's kind of red because of the broken down red cells when we're clamped. But here's the bad part of that. Those red cells are just smashed, and they hit the nephron. And have you had not a sifter, well, I guess, but I'm thinking of a colander where you're pushing things through a filter. That filter, which is a nephron that filters, is coated now with fragmented red cells. And if it keeps up, they're going to be covered, and you're going to have renal shutdown. So that's why the shock hypovolemic patient needs fluid. Now they need blood too, but if they could just get some fluid and keep it flowing and keep the nephrons open with fluid, good fluid, get some of that fragment out, those fragment cells. The interesting thing, because of vasoconstriction, the brain gets some good blood, and it's the last thing they say leaves us in a hypovolemic shock. If you've ever been around somebody, they can usually the next day remember about everything. And it's because that brain has been pushed to get good blood. The eyes, they vary. They dilate to get oxygen, but then they start pinpointing to keep the oxygen in. Now, because the blood is flowing, we don't have as much because it's going on the concrete. So there's not enough in there, much in there. So everything has the pump is going, but it doesn't have as much blood. And so the quality is just not as fluid, not as liquefied. And so there's where you remember ARDS, that blood is not just whistling through and doing great, rolling off and picking up. It's gone sluggish. It is slower. It's going to inflame our lungs. And in doing that, there's a little clotting going on. So that's your ARDS that might happen with trauma. And let's see, there was something else and because you're tachypnic, breathing fast, you are building up lactic acid with this slow blood, and the lungs are trying to get rid of it, which is a wonderful thing. But that's why shock patients need help fast. So that's hypovolemic. But the interesting thing is that cardiogenic is just about the same symptoms, but you didn't lose blood on the ground. What happened was you lost blood to tissue because of sluggishness. The heart cannot push it good, so it stays in all the hinterlands instead of going out, picking up oxygen, picking up or depositing oxygen, picking up waste and bringing it back, and it's not doing that because the pump can't do it. And I think we talked about congestive heart failure last week, and one thing I'm not sure. I got home and I thought, did I go on? You know, the first sign I told you last week is the lungs get loaded. They're already loaded. The sluggish. This is trauma, but in congestive, it's congestive cardiac stroke, cardiogenic stroke could be congestive heart failure because the pump just isn't good. So I told you dyspnea was your first sign. Well, we said last week cardiogenics and a diuretic. And then I can't remember, did we say the second, which may be years later, or the swollen? We may have said that. Swollen feet, swollen hands, because the pump is worsened and can't get that fluid back as good. So you're going to have similar symptoms because instead of blood being on the concrete, it's just out there, not coming back in with its nutrients or its waste sending and back. So cardiogenic problem, other than you've got a bad pump, that's different than hypovolemic. And I think I told you, we've already mentioned it, but just again, you and I have 5 quarts of blood in our body. If we lose a fifth of them, which is a quart, our life is in jeopardy. Now that's units, 2 units, 4 units, 6 units, 8, 10 units. Our body has 5 liters or 10 units of blood. And 2 units lost or a quart, we're in jeopardy of life. And I think I told you on, Dottie West and her 33 units of blood, did I tell you? The country music singer, Dottie. The newspapers said, Dottie West, if you recall, had an car accident, rushed into the Opry, and somebody picked her up. No, she didn't have an accident. I don't know. She was with a man trying to get her there, and they had a wreck. And she lacerated her liver And the newspaper said she died later, but she was in the hospital several days, and the paper would keep notes, media, and they said she has been given 3 times her body's volume of blood. Well, right then, you know she's probably gotten 30 units of blood. And then later it came out she got 33 units of blood. And I'm going on to tell you now, I may, if I hadn't already, on immunology, you know, we talked about the antibodies you and I are carrying around, probably carrying more than we should because we get a lot. But you never lose them unless you lose them out on the blood, out on the road. But you're not even going to lose them there because as soon as your body starts losing blood, I always think of an ostrich. Antibodies dive into the bone, into the, I was going to say bone marrow, but they hide, is what it amounts to. Antibodies hide. If Dottie West had lived with her 33 units of somebody's blood, she would have still had the antibodies she had developed or had made. Isn't that fascinating? So we never lose them as far as losing with blood because they go and hide and don't stay out there and pour out. And if I didn't tell you now, of course that's again the immune system. I was afraid I'd forget. I may repeat it when we do immunology. Let's see what else I want to say on that. Oh, on the shock. Now you and I, when somebody takes our blood pressure with a spigot, that first sound is when that vessel has been tight and there's very little blood going through. And so when you undo the round and you hear that first sound, it's that first gush of blood that hits the wall of the vein. And the last sound is when you're completely full. And I know you know that, or I guess you do, that that's what the blood pressure is, that first sound, and then when it's completely full, that last sound. And so, we don't want it to be hugely a huge difference. But we don't really want it to be small, that distance either. And what do we say normal? 120 over 80, something like that, or normal. And that's 40. The body, the people, powers that be, don't like it a lot. They don't want it a lot more than 40. They don't mind it a little closer. They don't want it in the hundreds, but 110 over 80 is okay. Now, so because if you hear the first sound at Spigma 70, that's a little low. And I hear the second at 50, I've just got I almost said volume, what's it called? Wide pressure volume, isn't it pressure volume? Yeah. You don't want it real small, 70 over 50, really? That means it hit and then it didn't take much blood to fill it up of all the blood you have. So you don't want it real small pressure volume between the systolic and diastolic. Now I'm getting back to the umbrella ones. It's called vasogenic. It's those shocks are real different than hypovolemic and cardiac, because you remember we were pallor and clammy. With vasogenic, they have the pulse pressure is very wide, which means they've got a lot of blood, because you don't hear the second sound till way later, which means they're flushed. So they're real flushy looking. And you think about it, septic people usually are flushed. Anaphylaxis, they're flushed. So the difference in those shocks and cardiac and vasogenic, pulse pressure will tell you one thing. So pulse pressure really tells you something. It means you've got a lot of blood extra if it's a wide, because that first sound, it takes a long time to get that second sound when the last blood coming into the vein that was squeezed makes a sound. I think that's really fascinating. Jennifer, did I miss anything? Beulah. Oh yeah, yeah, that's kind of interesting. The stages, if you watch the movie, you can see them, but when shock happens to any of us, it happens cellularly first, and cell level, and we can't tell a lot of difference. Then compensatory, is that next? Compensatory. The body is compensates. The pressure goes up. The heartbeat, it's compensating. And then progressive, it keeps getting worse. Our compensatory mechanisms are not holding us unless we have some help. Refractory, anytime I want you to know the word refractory, it usually means not good. It's death or about to be death. Anything that's refractory. So the stages are cellular and then compensatory, progressive, and then if it's beyond, their state is beyond, then they are refractory. Now I want to slip in, I've got 5 minutes, I think. I want to do a little bit on burns, and then I'll pick up if there's any more I want to say. But if you're burned, there will be, because I've got more I want to say about burn. Somebody that's burned, the cells are either destroyed or the top of them are scraped off and they're damaged. And if you recall from chemistry or your biochemistry, sodium is potassium is inside cells and sodium's outside. If you're burned, sodium goes in, tries to go in, finds an opening to get into a cell. And you know what follows sodium? Water. So that's why you're so swollen with a burn, is that those injured cells, sodium just got a opportunity to jump in there with fluid. Potassium came out. And then I want to, and so we talked about the amount of evaporation that goes with burns. My favorite, we nurses don't really have to come up with the percent of burns, but I think the rule of 9 is the best. Everything is divisible by 9. The smaller extremity is 9, so 4.5, 4.5 if you were running. The legs, 18, chest, 18, head, 9. And I usually try to get a laugh. Generic students don't laugh at it. I don't think they get it. Everything's 9 except the perineum, and everybody thinks it's underrated. It's 1%. Now that I think is kind of funny to say that. You all did good. Anyway, perineum is 1%. Everything else is, and so the front of the face would be 4.5. But it's easy to use that. As I said, you won't be using it, but it isn't. There are all kinds of formulas for the burn. Butterfly McQueen from Gone with the Wind, Prissy from Gone with the Wind. She died in 103 or something like that. And she was healthy till then. But they say take the age with the percent of burn. And if it's over 100, you're probably going to die. Well, butterfly was 103, and she had 30% burn, so she didn't live. But if somebody's 50 years old and they had a 30% burn, they're 80, so it's a good chance that they can make it. The interesting thing about burns, it's a lot like orthopedic nursing. It hasn't changed. It really hasn't. What has changed, I will say what has changed, but not that one, are the coverings while you're waiting on a graft for your skin. And they can take at the bottom of your foot and with like a cheese slicer and take a thin piece of skin, put it in an agar, bacterial solution, and agar it, and I think, I don't know how long it stays, but it will grow 150 times faster than you can grow that skin, and then it's ready for a graft on your body. There's no permanent graft but you. You're the only permanent. We can put potato skins that have been treated. They have the most wonderful, expensive coverings. While your skin is growing at the lab, and they're great, but they're not permanent. Nothing's permanent but you. The thing to remember, well, and next week, before we start the demonstration, I do want to go over the bath with you, burn nursing. And it's, when I say it hadn't changed, we still give baths and ointments. And the ointments are silver nitrate and sulfamalon. They're still the same ones you ever probably did in nursing school. I went to the University of Tennessee undergraduate, went to Le Bonheur. They use the same stuff I used 50 years ago. But because they're good. They have taken mummies, and it's amazing what 2,000 years ago they knew about burns. They were buried with barriers that they could tell the people were trying to keep them warm and not evaporate so badly. They said that they took, I think this is interesting, they knew to cover the burns, and they took the wax of bulls and put on burns. Now, I wonder why they did that and what they knew about that. But centuries ago, we hadn't done a lot more. We know you need a covering, and our worst things are infection. That's the very worst, is getting an infection because of the protection skin does. We'll pick it up next time. And I don't believe anybody's staying with me this afternoon, are you?
Lydia, could you clarify that we need to bring our application and all of our paperwork to you?
Yeah,
And
if you want me to turn it in for you. Yeah, and if you want to do your application, your criminal stuff, and your notarized, and your check to them, I'll just put it all together with my letter, and it'll be the next day.
No, I didn't.
Oh, y'all need to check this real quick. He thinks he's great. He thinks he's done it right.
when you've got active and stuff written up there, does that mean our license?
Means your license are active. Who said they're coming with me tomorrow? I know Liz, but, yeah, and who else?
Do we just show up with scrubs and we don't need to bring stethoscope?
You're gonna be with me on Monday.
Oh, no, I've been with you on Sunday. Coming. Do we just do, I mean,
Or
don't
whatever
bring,
you got. You got them?
I've got scrubs, yeah.
Don't bring purses.
Don't bring the
Put
cell
your-
phone and our keys in our pocket.
You're coming tomorrow. Yeah. Don't bring a purse. I put your license somewhere. Your license. So, but, I mean, they probably wouldn't care about that, but billfold leave in the car and it's secret.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to ask them. How do I go about doing a background check for me?
You go to Metro Center. Y'all know how to do the background, the criminal thing. How do you do that?
On the Tuesday website, there'll be just a place where it says background check, you've got the hit, and there's a form that you print out, and you'll go online, you can follow the schedule. It will ask you for an ONC number. On the left-hand side, right under where it says background check instructions, on the next line, it will say ONC numbers, RNs, I think was 1703, LPNs are a different number, and that's the only thing other than your personal information.
So what if I have one in my file already?
And it takes just.
In the state board?
No, where I work.
Can
we just get that?
Yeah.
Get their license with the board, you can call them.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, there, you know, like, I don't live here in town.
Yeah.
In Metro Center.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, just see if they would let you take a copy of it.
Okay.
Or if they say no, then ask them to send it to State Board of Nursing.
I did all of mine online, and then went down to a local
See, I
UPS
do know
store.
where I live, I have no web. I have no internet, no nothing.
Doesn't have to.
Isn't it frustrating?
Yeah, it is for
It feels
me.
badly for you, right? When everything like
The
this
only
is
thing I
online.
have is my phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
I'll see you all
He
next
told
week.
you, those with gastric bypass don't have the, those with gastric bypass don't have the intrinsic factor, nor do we usually have. I knew about the iron, but apparently my supplements weren't working. So a year ago, I walked into the ER with an H&H of 12.4 and 2.7. Walked in. Don't ask me. The hematologist said my heart must be very strong to tolerate it as long as I did. As far as I got there. 5 units of blood.
Wow. Wow.
I took 5 units of blood, 2 IV iron doses in the hospital, and then once a week after I was discharged.
How are you?
I'm great now.
You look fantastic.
I feel fantastic. I mean, I was just like,
I can't believe I even walk, had the strength to get out of bed.
I barely did. It was getting really, really bad. I knew it was bad.
Wow. Wow.
And I went last June for a follow-up, and he went ahead. He said my iron levels were fine, but they were like below into normal. So let's just give you a boost. So I gave him a boost, 5 iron. And I go back in June and that follow-up. And I'll probably have to have iron Yeah. Yeah, and with gastric bypass, you have to take supplements anyway, and the iron supplements weren't working, but my B12 was. My B12 was fine.
Yeah.
I know. But I'm the one in a person that's gonna have to have IV iron every day.
Indefinitely?
Until I check.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. All
I
right.
can't believe it was that way.
All right, Denise, what are we going to do? What are we going to
You know
do?
what I'm thinking? If I retake this, how soon am I getting this course? That's it, we ignore the
Now,
spring
I
class.
tell you, I got it. Oh,
Wow.
we were through. I'm sorry, Megan.